The night smelled like cinnamon and pine, the choir still ringing in our ears when my parents said, "Everyone gets a little gift." Under the tree, my sister's boy tore open a crisp envelope. A $5,000 account. Cameras flashed. Applause. My son peeled back Scotch tape to find a single $5 bill folded like a pity. He looked up at me and whispered, "Did I do something wrong?" I smiled. In the kitchen with the dishwasher humming carols, I opened my banking app. Click passwords changed. Click every recurring transfer to mom and dad canceled. When the phone started ringing first, my sister, then my father. Each call sounded like sleigh bells on fire. Panicked, pleading, rehearsed. Here's my promise. If you stay, this isn't a shouting match. It's a paper trail. Before this is over, you'll see what $5 can expose: names on accounts, dates in margins, signatures that don't match, a quilt with a secret stitched into its seam, a key, a box, a clause that says fairness isn't equal things, it's honest math. You'll hear confessions where carols used to be, and you will watch the balance reset in a way no one at that tree ever expected. Humiliation brought us here. Consequences will take us home. Because I didn't give my parents $10,000 to fund my nephew's applause. And if you think the $5 was the insult, wait until you see what it buys before the candles burn out. Stay. The twists are coming and the payoff is worth every click. My name is Mary Whitaker. I'm 58 and I keep the books for 3 small businesses in our town: a hardware store, a salon, and the plumbing supply that still handwrites tickets. I was widowed 5 years ago, and I am the mother of 1 boy who grew faster than my grief ever could. Numbers have been my living, but steadiness is my faith. We had come straight from the candlelight service, wax halos drying on our thumbs, the last alto line of Silent Night still tucked under my tongue. Mom's pot roast waited like it always did, surrounded by bowls of green beans and potatoes so buttery they reflected the tree lights. My sister Caroline had set her phone against a stack of napkins to record. She documents holidays the way other people archive museum collections. Dad fiddled with the remote until the football game surrendered to a fireplace channel. The grandkids arranged themselves on the carpet with the serious choreography of children in sweaters. Mom cleared her throat. It was the same speech she loved to give, the one about traditions, and everyone leaving with their hearts full even if their hands weren't. "Everyone gets a little gift," she said brightly, and the room hummed with the soft rustle of tissue paper and taped envelopes. It was an old promise in our family. A kind way of saying we don't do extravagance, we do thoughtfulness. Caroline's boy got the first envelope because Caroline always moved first, smooth, cheerful, unofficial master of ceremonies. He tore it open with the confidence of a child who has never once reached into a pocket and come up empty. "It says account," he announced, squinting at a crisp note. Caroline leaned in to help him read, and the words came out as if they carried their own spotlight: $5,000. The recording phone caught Caroline's delighted gasp, and Mom's clap, and Dad's proud, soft attaboy. The tree answered with 1,000 tiny reflections in the baubles, as if the ornaments themselves applauded. I felt my son stiffen beside me. Evan, 12, newly tall in a jacket that still smelled faintly of the department store. He turned the envelope in his lap like he wasn't sure where to hold it, and I put a hand on his knee, steady as a paperweight. We'd been in rooms like this all our lives, but not quite this one. Not with this particular emphasis of joy. When it was Evan's turn, he opened carefully, because that is how he has learned to move through other people's houses. A single bill slid into his palm, green and light as a leaf. $5. He looked down at it longer than necessary and then up, trying to find a place to park his expression that wouldn't make trouble. His mouth opened a little, closed again. The recording phone did not bother to notice him. Carolyn was still narrating to her audience, propping her boy's envelope against the mantel for a photo. Mom reached for Evan's shoulder from across the coffee table and told him to put his money in a safe place, sweetheart, and Dad nodded in the vague way of men trying hard not to stare into discomfort. I said something cheerful about hot cocoa. I said it to Evan, but I aimed it into the room like you aim a candle into drafts. I could have said more. I have a long attic of sentences my sister has never let me unpack about fairness and dignity, and how generations take shape when no one thinks they are modeling anything. But there's an accountant's trick I trust more than any speech. You change one number at the source, and the entire ledger will quietly correct itself. Caroline moved on to gifts from her own household candles, a scarf, a new case for her boy's tablet. Mom passed Evan a book she said she found at the church sale for $1, and said something about how he loved biographies, didn't he? Evan gave her a thank you that fit inside the space she had made for it. He knows how to be gracious. We worked hard at that. He put the book on his lap and smoothed the cover with his thumb, as if the smudge he felt there would rub out with enough patience. I excused myself to the kitchen to refill the gravy boat. It was a real task, but also a hallway toward quiet. I set the boat on the counter, opened the fridge, and let the bright island of light smooth my breathing. In the corner next to the phone with its long cord tangled into a curl, sat Mom's Christmas stationery. The pattern of cardinals and holly. She buys every year at the pharmacy. The leftover envelopes looked like something that had changed its mind halfway through becoming a blessing. Numbers are calmer than people. They don't flinch. They don't tell stories to make themselves kinder. I took my own phone from my purse and set it behind the cookie tin. The bank app opened with the same neutral blue it always does. My thumbprint was enough to enter a world where intention mattered more than tone. I went first to the list of scheduled transfers, those automatic second Saturday deposits I set up after Dad insisted their retirement checks felt pinched. It had been my way of staying daughter and daughter-in-law at once, no drama, just support. I tapped the edit function, removed the January transfer, then the February one, then chose until further notice. A row of payees appeared familiar as neighbors. I removed one, then another, then the third that had been added last spring, just in case they needed to help Caroline with some bills. They would still have their own accounts. They would still have their choices, but they would not have my shortcuts. I changed the passwords, the security questions, the backup email, each step as quiet as lowering a window against a draft. I stood with the phone in my hands and listened to the house. The living room swelled and receded with holiday chatter. The football channel had found its way back again, and Dad laughed at something he half heard. My mother's footsteps approached and passed, then the pop of a new log on the fire. In another room, the washer thumped once, a reminder that even on holidays, someone is cleaning up after everyone's joy. I poured gravy and returned to the table with it, and when I set it down, my hand was steady. Caroline was in the middle of a story about a colleague's cruise, the kind with unlimited soft serve you eat because it's free, not because you want it. Evan had placed his $5 bill inside the biography and closed the cover as if the book might sweeten the bill by contact. Mom asked how long the service ran tonight, and did the children like the real candles, or were they too scared of drips? Dad told a joke he couldn't remember the end of, and we all laughed in the way you do, kindly, and a little relieved to be invited into a sound that wasn't sharp. I used to believe holidays could be rescued by the right sentence, that if I formed one perfect bridge of words, everyone would cross to the same shore. But bridges with no footings are just pretty arcs. Tonight I let the bridge remain in my pocket. I cut the roast. I complimented my sister's cranberry relish. I asked my father if he wanted more potatoes, and when he said he shouldn't, I gave him another spoonful anyway, because love is also knowing where we break our own rules. Later, when the gifts were stacked, when the kids had reached the fidget stage that means coats are incoming, Caroline asked if she could repost the video of her son's envelope to the church page. She asked it casually, like asking if anyone wanted tea. Mom said yes, of course, what a sweet thing to share. And Dad made a comment about friends who'd be proud to see what their church family does for its young people. No one looked at Evan. This isn't because they were cruel. It was because they were busy telling themselves this is what generosity looks like, and that story takes both hands to hold. We put on our coats. At the door, Mom kissed Evan's cheek with quick, dry lips and told him to send her a photo of the book once he started it. Dad hugged us with his old jacket smell of cedar and cold air. Caroline pressed Tupperware on me like homemade diplomacy. The night was sharp and clean on the porch. Our breath rose like ghosts who knew how to behave. In the car, Evan buckled himself. He looked at me and didn't ask the question I saw rising. He pressed his forehead to the window and watched the snow along the curb, where the plow had left a seam like an underlined sentence. I told him I loved him, which is not the answer to everything, but is the floor under your feet when something shakes. At home, I put the leftovers in our fridge and set his book on the kitchen table where I would see it first thing in the morning. I slid my phone onto the counter and let the faint glow disappear. There would be time later to write everything down to file the evening's entries where they belonged, the kind of ledger that doesn't fit into a spreadsheet, but still totals up. And then I heard the first ring, the kind that practically asks to be answered because its insistence belongs to the one who paid for it. It stopped. Another one followed a different tone the number I grew up dialing. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and stared at the screen as if I could see through it to the living room we had just left, to the mouths that had smiled and said, "We all get a little." I did not touch it. I waited through the third ring, the fourth, the fifth, until the quiet in my kitchen was its own choice. Then the calls came panicked pleading. The first ring hiccuped into the quiet like a small animal that had lost its way. Then another came right behind it. Then a chain of them. And when I finally answered, it was Caroline, bright with urgency and breathless from the speed of her certainty, telling me she had seen something strange in the family accounts, and that I must have pressed the wrong button, and that I should put it back, that the timing was awful, that Dad would worry that Mom would not sleep. And before I could say anything, she said the line that would be repeated for the next hour by a chorus of voices. "I have loved my entire life. You overreacted. Restore the money." And then she softened it with a sister's sigh and said she knew I meant well, and that it was Christmas, and could we please not do this now? And I said I would call her back and set the phone down, and the screen lit again with my father's name, and he sounded older than he had by the tree. A careful voice that did not want to take sides, saying your mother is unsettled. And surely this is a misunderstanding. You did not mean to cut off the transfers. It cannot be what it looks like. You overreacted, restore the money. And I kept my own voice low, the way you hold a china cup so it does not rattle in the saucer, and told him we would talk tomorrow. And after that, it was Aunt Ruth who uses the holidays to practice worry like a hymn. And my cousin who has never met a situation he did not think could be solved by a brisk scolding. And then Caroline again on text this time, long paragraphs and short commands emojis. I pretended not to see, telling me to be reasonable, telling me there had been a miscommunication, telling me the family did not need an accountant tonight, it needed a peacemaker. And I looked at the clock and reminded myself that peace is not the same as silence, and that stillness is not surrender. So I put the phone face down and walked to the living room where Evan was sitting on the carpet with his knees tented and the book I had placed on the kitchen table already in his hands, the 5 tucked safe inside like a pressed leaf. And I asked if Coco would help both of us do something as ordinary as breathing. And he nodded, and asked in that way 12-year-olds have of testing the air, not the rule. If it was late enough for the good mugs, the big ones with the chipped rims. We bring out only when the house has earned them, and I said it was, and set the pot to steam, and found the tin of powdered chocolate his grandmother had bought on sale last January. And while the milk warmed, I dug out the old Christmas record I have owned since college, the one with the slightly warped edge that makes the first song waver, as if the singer were crossing a river in a rowboat, and I set it gently on the turntable, and felt the room decide to rest, and when I brought the mugs to the coffee table, Evan was sitting as straight as if he were at a piano lesson, his face open and braced, and he asked me in a voice so careful it made my ribs tighten whether he had done something wrong. And I told him no, that the 5 in his book said nothing about him, and everything about choices other people had made, that sometimes grown adults confuse tradition with convenience, that sometimes they confuse generosity with spectacle, and that the only thing I wanted him to carry from tonight was the knowledge that he was loved, and that I had not changed any of the numbers because of who he is, but because of how I was raised to believe fairness is supposed to work. And I asked him to hold the mug with both hands and inhale the steam until his eyes felt better, and he did, and a line of whipped cream gave him a white mustache. And finally, he smiled small, but real. And he said he liked the second song on this record because the low notes sounded like a big ship's horn. And I told him I liked it because the singer never rushes. She trusts the measure. And that is what we were going to do tonight. Trust the measure. So when the phone rattled again, I moved it to the far counter and let the messages collect like snow on a railing, and we listened to the record through. Once cocoa gone and mugs heavy with the last sweetness. And when I tucked him into bed, he told me he would start the book tomorrow, and maybe he would put the bill in a jar on his dresser where he keeps marbles and the ticket stub from the Science Museum, and I told him that sounded just right. And after he turned on his side and clipped his bedtime lamp into a crescent, I went back to the kitchen and took the phone in my hand and let myself read the words that had stacked up. You overreacted. Restore the money. It is just until the new year. Mom is crying. Dad is anxious. Do not punish everyone for one little mistake. We can talk about rules later. And in between, those were kinder lines from cousins who did not want to pick a side but wanted the noise to stop. And then another call from my father that I sent to voicemail, because I needed to think without the tug of his breath in my ear. And I did not cry, although my face felt like it wanted to, and I did not pace because that makes one look like a person preparing to lose. And I did not write a speech, even though words were rising because I knew speeches satisfy only the person delivering them. So I did the things that build a spine for the next day. I found my checkbook and my folder with household accounts, and I slid them into my work bag. I opened my laptop and pulled up the website for the bank where my parents and I keep our accounts and checked the holiday hours. I sent a calm email to the branch manager whose card I have kept since the summer when I helped my mother sort out a misplaced deposit, asking for a short meeting on the first business day. And in the subject line, I typed a line that did not accuse anyone of anything appointment regarding family accounts and beneficiary designations. And then I called the elder law attorney whose name I had been given 2 years ago when a neighbor needed help with her husband's care plan, and because it was late, I reached her answering service and left a message with the polite details people like me use when we want to be taken seriously. My name, my parents' ages, the existence of a power of attorney. I needed to understand better. A request for the earliest consultation to review responsibilities and boundaries. And when I hung up, I wrote on a sticky note the only sentence I intended to bring with me to any conversation tomorrow. No shouting, just paper. And I set that note under the magnet that holds the grocery list, because discipline lives best where you cannot miss it. And then I poured myself a glass of water, because sometimes the best way to answer a family crisis is with an action no one can argue with. And I stood in the dim light of my kitchen and thought about the way Caroline's voice had leaped from scold to soothe and back to scold, and how my father had tried to be everyone's bridge at once. And I allowed myself the smallest flare of anger not at the particular bills or the number of zeros, but at the ease with which adults, even loving ones, can humiliate a child without knowing that is what they have done. And I promised myself that tomorrow I would ask questions no one could dismiss as tone or temper questions with dates and payee lines and memo fields. Questions that arrive in ink and the phone buzzed again and again, and I did not answer, and I did not scroll, and I did not defend myself into exhaustion, because that is the trap of a long night, and it always leaves you poorer. And by the time the record had reached the inner circle, and the needle lifted itself with that tiny click of grace, I had a plan that did not require anyone else to be wise right now. Just me and my habits and a calendar that would forgive a holiday. And when I turned off the kitchen light, the house went gentle, as if it understood the room had decided on a speed that would not shatter, and I let the quiet hold. And I thought if it was a mistake, the bank would prove it right. The next morning, I arrived at the bank 15 minutes before it opened. I didn't want to be the first one through the doors in a rush. I wanted to be waiting calm, deliberate. When the manager Rhonda unlocked the main entrance and saw me there, she smiled with polite recognition. I had only met her twice before, once during a drive-through deposit issue once, when Mom accidentally endorsed a check on the wrong line. "We have you on the schedule," she said, leading me back through a narrow hallway that smelled faintly of printer ink and lemon cleaner. Her office was small but neat, decorated with a single poinsettia and a photo of a lake cabin framed behind her desk. "How can I help you today?" I began with what I thought was a simple question. "Can you help me trace a $10,000 transfer I made to my parents' account 2 weeks ago?" She nodded, pulling up the account information I had provided in my email. "Since this was your outgoing transaction, I can show you the destination account and confirm receipt. Beyond that, I can't access any third-party data." Privacy regulations. I expected that. I wasn't here for gossip. I was here for numbers. She turned the monitor slightly. "Here it is. $10,000 transferred from your checking account on December 10th to the joint account ending in 7741. I stared at it. I remembered entering that number, trusting it would land somewhere safe, somewhere honest. I asked, "What happened after it landed?" She tilted her head. "I can only confirm what was outgoing from your account. I can't trace their disbursements. But if they shared statements with you, or if you have power of attorney, that would change things." That last part hung in the air like a key looking for a lock. I didn't have POA, but I was starting to suspect someone else did. I leaned in slightly. Would a POA allow someone to open a custodial account for a minor? She paused. "Generally, yes. If the POA is broad enough, it can authorize someone to act on behalf of the principal in setting up 529 plans or custodial accounts, especially if it's in the interest of a family member, even if the money used wasn't originally theirs." Her eyes narrowed. "That would be murky. A fiduciary has a duty to act in the best interest of the principal. Diverting funds from a gift or reimbursement into a different relative's name could raise ethical and legal issues." I didn't speak. Instead, I took out my own printed account statement and laid it on the desk. I pointed. "That's my transfer. December 10th. 10,000 out." She nodded. Confirmed. Then I said, sliding forward another sheet I had received from a cousin who worked in education finance, "This account was opened on December 13th. A 529 plan in my nephew's name, with a $5,000 initial deposit." Her face did not change, but she straightened her spine slightly. "That's a coincidence," she said. "Maybe," I said. "But the memo line on the contribution says, Mary gift 10K. Mary is my sister. And the 10K? That was mine." Rhonda exhaled slowly. "We see things like this more often than you'd imagine. End-of-year gifting gets complicated, especially with blended families and unclear paperwork." "What about the rest of the money?" I asked. "Can you see anything about where the remaining $5,000 went?" She looked down. "Again, I can't confirm other people's account activity. But I can tell you what might be typical." She opened a notepad and wrote one phrase, "roof repair." I frowned. "What?" "Sometimes," she said carefully, "a home expense can justify a withdrawal, especially if the person with POA is also living in the house or managing maintenance. I've seen that language used before." I reached into my bag again. This time I had a printout from a business registry. My sister's husband, Tom, owned an LLC called Ever Gable Home Solutions, filed under roofing and renovations. "You're saying," I said slowly, "that if someone were to use their parents' funds to pay their spouse's company for a so-called roof repair, and labeled it as such, it might pass as legitimate." She didn't answer directly. She didn't have to. Her silence was full of stories she wasn't allowed to tell. I folded the papers back into my folder. "Thank you. This helps. Would you like to schedule another meeting if you obtain POA access or documentation from your parents, I think?" So I said. "But first, I need to find out who gave her that kind of power over my parents." I left the bank with a lead and a headache. $10,000, my 10,000 hadn't just vanished. It had been quietly reallocated. Half to a 529 plan for my nephew, and the rest maybe to a roof repair conveniently routed through my brother-in-law's business. All while my father still called me by my full name, and my mother forgot if she'd already added salt to the stew. The next day, I stopped by the house under the pretense of dropping off some leftover pot roast. My mother opened the door with a tired smile, wearing her cardigan inside out. Her lipstick was uneven, and there was a faint burn mark on the sleeve near her wrist. "Oh," she said. "You didn't have to do that, sweetheart." She led me inside like everything was fine. My dad was in his recliner, remote in one hand, TV blaring a game show he clearly wasn't following. I looked at the coffee table and noticed the Pillbox Mondays section still full, even though it was Wednesday. I picked it up gently and tilted it toward him. "Did you take your morning meds?" I asked. He blinked at the box, then at me. "I think so. Maybe." My sister walked in just then, jingling her car keys and wearing that clipped expression that always meant I was about to be managed. "Don't worry, I handle all the paperwork. The meds, too. He probably just forgot to mark it down." I nodded slowly. "Got it." I followed her into the kitchen. The calendar on the wall had smeared pencil scribbles and no actual appointments listed. Mom's checkup was 2 weeks ago, right? She was already rummaging through a drawer. "Yeah, I had to move it. Something came up with Tom's work and she was too tired anyway. Rescheduled for when?" She looked up for half a beat, then back down. "Next week, I think. I've got it written down somewhere." I didn't press it. Not yet. Instead, I walked into the laundry room, pretending to look for paper towels, and quickly snapped a photo of the medicine drawer. Bottles with expired dates. Duplicates. One without a label at all. I took another photo of the pillbox on the coffee table. That evening, I got a call from Marlene, one of Mom's old church friends. Retired nurse. I hadn't spoken to her since the Easter potluck last year, but she sounded worried. "I don't want to meddle," she said. "But your mother wandered into our yard last week, thinking she was on her way to the post office. It was past noon, she hadn't brushed her hair, and she didn't have her shoes on." My throat tightened. "Did she seem confused?" "Very," Marlene said. "She kept asking where her father was. And honey, she called me Margie. I haven't been Margie in 30 years. I thanked her, promised to follow up, and sat for a long time with the phone resting in my lap. Something wasn't just off. Something was being covered up. That night, I started a care notebook. Nothing dramatic. Just dates, times, and what I observed. I noted the meds, the cardigan, Marlene's call. I downloaded a timestamp camera app and uploaded the pillbox photo. I printed out the elder law checklist I had received from the attorney's office and highlighted the red flags I had already confirmed: inconsistent medication, signs of confusion, financial control by someone other than the principal. I flipped to a blank page and wrote at the top, "Who has power of attorney?" The next day I found out. I asked Dad while we were watching old westerns together. Mom had gone upstairs for a nap. "Hey," I said casually, "remember that time I helped you do your taxes? Back in 2018? He chuckled. "You found that deduction for the heater." "Yeah. I was thinking I might need to help again soon. Do you still have someone listed for power of attorney?" He nodded slowly. "Mary took care of that. After I had the fall. That would have been 2 years ago. Did you read the forms when you signed them?" He shrugged. "She said they were standard, just in case we needed help at the hospital." "Did you ever talk to a lawyer?" No. She brought the papers, said it was quicker that way." I asked Mom later gently. She frowned. "Your sister said it was just for emergencies. She filled it all out. I don't remember signing anything else. That was all I needed." The care notebook came back out. This time I added a new tab labeled POA Timeline. I wrote down the fall date, the hospitalization, and when I suspected the documents were signed. I marked every financial decision I'd seen since: $10,000, gift rerouted, roof payment delayed, doctor appointments, missed medications. and I kept writing long after they'd gone to bed. If she holds the pen, what else has she signed? I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the $5 bill folded in my son's palm. Not even a crisp one, soft-edged like it had been pulled from the bottom of a purse. That image, paired with Dad confirming Mary had power of attorney, kept looping through my head like a cruel lullaby. The next morning, I took my coffee to the porch swing and called Aunt Lois. She was always the family memory bank. If a baby was born a wedding forgotten, or someone got cut out of a will, she knew the why and when. We hadn't spoken much since Thanksgiving, but she picked up on the second ring. "I was just thinking about you," she said. "I heard what happened at Christmas." I didn't ask how. Family gossip spread faster than wildfire in our town. Instead, I asked directly, "Did Mom or Dad ever talk to you about setting up anything for the grandkids? A trust matching funds. Something." Lois paused, then gave a low hum. "Your mom did. Couple years back. Said she and your father wanted to encourage savings. She mentioned matching contributions up to $5,000 for each grandchild, but only if the parent contributed first, and it had to be in before the new year." My chest tightened. "Was that written down?" "I never saw it," she said. "But your cousin Tracy might have. She helped them sort through their estate paperwork last spring." I called Tracy next. She sounded surprised, but not unwilling to talk. There was a codicil, handwritten addendum to their will. It said each grandchild would get up to $5,000 matched if their parent deposited into a college fund before December 31st of any calendar year. It was meant to reward planning. I sat in silence for a moment. Then I asked, what would happen if the parent didn't contribute? Then no match. That was it. That was the trick. Mary hadn't just diverted my $10,000. She had used me to trigger a match for her own child. A match my son didn't get because I hadn't contributed to a 529 in his name. I'd sent money to my parents thinking it was a gesture of support, a way to give back. Instead, she twisted it. I stared at my son later that day while he worked on a jigsaw puzzle. He was so patient, so careful with the pieces. I imagined the kind of future $5,000 might shape. Music lessons, summer science programs, a sense of security that no child should feel guilty about. I replayed Mary's smug voice on Christmas. Everyone gets a little something. No. Some of us got played. I brought it up during a Sunday lunch, just Mom, Dad, Mary, and me. I watched Mary load sweet potatoes onto her plate as I spoke. "I heard there's a codicil about matching grandkids' funds." Her fork paused mid-air. Mom blinked, looking between us. Dad looked confused. "That was years ago," Mary said quickly, "and it was never finalized." Funny, Tracy remembers seeing it. So does Aunt Lois. "Even if it existed," she said, voice tightening, "it was about planning. If you didn't plan for your kid, that's not my fault." Dad cleared his throat. "Mary helped us with the paperwork. We trusted her." That was the moment I realized they truly didn't remember. Not clearly. Not completely. And Mary had filled in the blanks for them with a pen in one hand and power in the other. "Let's see the clause," I said, voice calm and clear, word for word. I left Sunday lunch with one mission: get the clause, get the law, and get the facts straight before another dime left my account, or another tear left my child's eye. Mary had been allowed to draw the map for too long. It was time to redraw the lines with ink, not assumption. On Monday morning, I sat in the office of an elder law attorney named Carolyn Weiss. Her office smelled of peppermint and printer ink, and the first thing she said after offering me tea was, "Start at the beginning, but tell me where you want this to end." I wanted clarity. Legally, financially, emotionally. So I told her everything down to the wrinkled $5 bill, and I didn't cry until I got to the part where my son whispered, "Did I do something wrong?" Caroline didn't flinch. When I finished, she nodded, opened a folder and said, Let's talk about POA. Power of attorney, she explained, was a powerful but misunderstood legal document. It let the holder act in financial or medical matters when the principal's capacity began to fade. It did not, however, give them carte blanche. A POA has a fiduciary duty to act in the principal's best interest, she said, not their own. Using funds to benefit themselves or their family without documentation can be considered self-dealing. If that codicil was leveraged under POA to match funds selectively, it could be challenged. I asked about guardianship. She explained temporary guardianship could be requested if neglect or abuse was suspected, especially if cognitive decline was demonstrable and financial harm had occurred. But it can get adversarial quickly, she warned. That's why your documentation will be critical. I pulled out the photos I'd taken, the pillbox mess, the overdue appointment cards, the notes from Dad's misplaced checkbook. She scanned through them with careful eyes. Keep documenting, she said. And add timestamps. Make a log. Even small things help establish a pattern. I asked what else I could do now quietly without escalation. She outlined immediate steps. Freeze my parents' credit through all 3 bureaus to prevent unauthorized loans or changes. Set up transaction alerts on their bank accounts, if I had view-only access, or encourage them to do so. Begin consolidating all statements, transactions, and correspondence tied to recent large withdrawals, especially around Christmas. And one more thing, verify the donations. You said your parents give to the church every December. Check with the treasurer. Confirm if this year was unusually large or redirected. If funds are missing, it may support a pattern of redirection. I felt the edges of control returning. Not revenge, not chaos, but order. Tangible, traceable, undeniable order. Can you find a copy of that codicil? She asked. I can try. I know where the will is kept. If she hasn't removed it, it should still be there. Do that soon. And let's aim for something concrete before New Year's Eve. Courts move slowly. Family dinners move fast. If you're going to confront this, it should be civil and ideally supported by facts. She tapped her pen gently against her legal pad. If your sister is acting in good faith, the truth won't harm her. If she isn't, it will expose her. Either way, you win. I left her office feeling steadier than I had in weeks. I spent that afternoon freezing credit, requesting statements, and emailing the church treasurer. He replied within the hour, confirming a December donation, but the receipt listed a donor name that wasn't my parents'. That night, I sat at the kitchen table organizing everything into folders. One for financials, one for health, one for legal notes, and one newly labeled in black ink for truth. Because come Sunday, I wasn't just bringing mashed potatoes. I was bringing evidence. On Sunday, I'd put the truth on the table with the pot roast. I spent the entire week preparing for Sunday dinner with the precision of a general planning a campaign. Each document had its place. Each question I might ask had a calm, fact-based delivery rehearsed. I wasn't going there to accuse or explode. I was going there to reveal. When Sunday arrived, I brought pot roast sweet potato casserole and a neatly labeled binder full of receipt statements and timelines. I dressed as if for church, blouse, pressed hair done. I looked like reason itself. Mary was already there when I arrived, setting the table with Mom's good china, her voice syrupy as she asked if I needed help with the food. Dad sat in his recliner, eyes distant. Mom dozed off in the kitchen. The house felt suspended in a strange hush, as if it too were waiting to see what would unfold. Dinner began with Grace and meatloaf. I waited until the dishes had been passed and a few polite compliments exchanged before I reached into my bag and quietly began laying pages beside each plate. Bank records, transaction logs, a printout of the $5 donation to my son, and the $5 or $1,000 $529 account opened days after my $10 $1,000 transfer. Mary's smile cracked slightly. "What is this?" she asked. "Just some information I thought we should all look at together," I said evenly. It seems my gift to Dad was used to fund your child's account and your husband's LLC. I'd like to understand how that happened. She looked around the table, waiting for someone to come to her defense. Dad blinked. Mom stirred in her seat but said nothing. Silence held. I only did what was best for the kids, Mary said, her voice tightening. Mom and Dad wanted to help. You always make things so dramatic. I'm not making anything, I said. These are facts. The numbers are yours. I'm just asking for clarity. Mary reached into her bag and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. She smoothed it flat and slid it across the table to me. If you're looking for closure, she said, I wrote this up. It's an apology. You can sign it and we can all move on. I didn't touch the paper. My eyes scanned the text, phrased like a confession, implying I had misunderstood, overreacted, caused harm to the family. Signing it would paint me as unstable, controlling, divisive. I looked at her. You want me to apologize for asking where my money went? For asking why my son was handed a $5 bill while yours was handed an account worth 1,000 times more? She didn't respond. Then let's not guess. Let's not spin. Let's go to the document that set this in motion. Let's read the codicil. Together. Everyone shifted. Mom opened her eyes, fully focused now. Dad looked at Mary. Fine, I said, my voice steady. Let's read it together. Mary pulled the envelope from her bag like it was a game-changing move. Inside was the codicil, slightly crumpled, folded into thirds. She held it up the room, watching like it was a piece of sacred scripture. Dad leaned forward, squinting. Mom sat straighter than she had all night. Mary read it aloud, her voice steady, almost smug at first. The matching contribution clause, she began, and the words spilled out like lawyerese. Grandchildren were eligible to receive a matching contribution of up to $5,000 toward educational accounts if a parental contribution was made by December 31st of that calendar year. She paused, looking at me like that would be the end of it. But I wasn't just listening. I was reading ahead, eyes scanning every clause, every footnote. There it was. A line few would catch if they weren't looking carefully. A definition tucked inside parentheses like an afterthought. Parental contribution refers to funds directly contributed by the child's biological or legal guardian. Not the grandparents. Not someone acting on behalf of the grandparents. Not via POA. This clause at its core was never meant to be triggered by an aunt using her parents' money to game the system for her own child. It was meant to encourage parents to save with a loving boost from grandma and grandpa. My $10,000, it had been taken under the guise of being a gift to my parents. They never contributed a dime to my son's account because no such account had ever been opened. That $5 bill in his envelope, that wasn't a gift. It was a receipt. A placeholder to fulfill the technical minimum of everyone gets something. I slid the document across the table to Dad. Did you read this part? I pointed to the clause. He looked confused. Mary stepped in too fast. They gave me power of attorney. I just did what they would have wanted. Mom reached for the paper. Her fingers traced the margin. I hadn't seen it before, a handwritten note in soft pencil, faded but legible. It was in Mom's hand. I would know her script anywhere. Fairness isn't equal things. It's honest math. Silence followed. I felt something tighten in my chest. That was her philosophy. Not just about money, but about love, about life. She used to say it when we were kids, fighting over who got the bigger cookie or the deeper scoop of ice cream. It wasn't about making things the same. It was about making them right. This match clause was meant to match what I as a parent gave, I said slowly. You used Mom and Dad's money, not yours. That's not parental. That's procedural manipulation. Mary looked irritated. You're being pedantic. The account got funded. The kid benefits. It's all in the family. But it wasn't. That's what made my stomach churn. It wasn't that my nephew had $5,000. It was that my son had nothing, not even the dignity of equal treatment, and the money I had worked for had been funneled behind my back to help someone else appear generous. I turned to Dad. Did you intend to give $5,000 to one grandchild and $5 to another? He looked startled. No, I thought we were matching whatever you contributed, and you thought I contributed to my son's $529. He hesitated. His eyes flicked toward Mary. She said you had. My throat dried. And you believed that without checking with me, she handles the paperwork, he said, as if that answered everything. Mom whispered something. I leaned closer. What was that, Mom? Not what I meant it to be, she said. Wasn't supposed to look like that. That was all she said. But it was enough. I leaned back and looked at the table. The roast now cold. The plates half-eaten. The document in the center like a bomb that had just gone off. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. If it's honest math, I said, gathering the paperwork, let's audit the numbers. I tucked the binder aside and waited for Mom to summon me to her sewing room. The quilt hung on her old oak frame, half draped like a promise. She gestured for me to sit as the afternoon sun ambered through the curtains, casting the stitches in soft relief. She handed me the quilt slowly. The fabric smelled of lavender and mothballs, a scent I remembered from childhood, things preserved quietly. She urged me to unfold it fully. When I did, I found a single star patch near the lower corner, its points stitched in gold thread. In the very center, a tiny key was hand-sewn, nearly invisible, unless you looked for it. My throat tightened. The key was narrow and delicate, as though meant for a small lock, a jewelry box, or a safe deposit drawer. I swallowed and asked, "Why the key?" Mom's eyes flicked to my face. She said softly, "It's a reminder." She paused and brushed her fingers over the patch. That little key, that $5 key, symbolized your promise to me when you were a girl. Always look beneath the surface. Her voice was gentle, but I knew she meant something vital. I slipped a hand inside one of the quilt's folds and felt paper. Quietly, I extracted a folded recipe card. It bore her familiar handwriting. It said, Safe Deposit Box, Box 23, Alvarez Bank, 7th Street Branch. Below that, in careful script, Call Alvarez, Whitaker Treasurer. My heart hammered. She had left me instructions as if she knew this day would come. I looked up. You kept this for me. She nodded, tears shining. When love gets noisy, let the records do the talking. She cleared her throat. I hoped you'd know where to look. I sat stunned. The quilt, the key, the card, all pieces she concealed while Mary rearranged everything else. I felt the weight of her trust and the danger of her secrecy. In that moment, I understood the quilt was more than comfort. It was a map in cloth. The key was more than ornament. It was permission. I laid the quilt across my lap and traced the star with my finger. I whispered to Mom, "Thank you." She nodded as though she had finally spoken aloud something she'd long carried in silence. I closed my eyes for a moment, remember what she said, not loud like an accusation, but soft like a resolve. When love gets noisy, the records do the talking. Because she gave me that quilt, I would find what Mary tried to steal. I would reopen that safe deposit box. I would call Alvarez and Mr. Whitaker. There was more in that quilt than warmth. I rose and said I'll go tonight. She didn't stop me. I gathered the quilt cradling its weight and left the room. As I reached the hallway, I glanced back and wondered, what did Mom stash away from my sister's pen? I drove home in silence after I left Mom quilt in the back seat, heart humming with purpose. But the quiet didn't last. Within hours, I started seeing rumors floating through church aisles, whispered in halls, delivered with well-practiced pity. Someone asked the church treasurer if I'd asked to match a $5,000 donation. Someone else cornered a deacon and lamented that I was casting blame at Christmas. A neighbor told me Mary had already told the ladies' luncheon I was upset that Dad didn't leave me more. She'd planted the seed. That same evening, I checked the listing sites quietly. There it was, our parents' home. Charming mid-century ranch in quiet neighborhood. Possible seller financing acceptable. The listing was generic, but unmistakably there's 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, same acreage. My throat tightened. A few hours later, the locks had changed. When I arrived at the house with fresh batteries for Dad's TV remote, the key no longer turned. The front porch light flickered off, and a gleaming brochure lay waiting on the welcome mat. Serene assisted living options. Glossy pages promising comfort care and peace of mind. Mary met me at the threshold with a sad sigh. I thought you'd understand. I'm only trying to protect them. I didn't answer. Instead, I turned and walked inside past the new deadbolt step by step, noting how my parents paused familiar faces but 2 years older in that space. I saw a flyer for memory support tucked under the coffee table. I smelled antiseptic in the hallway. That night, I drafted a report to APS outlining signs of neglect, changed locks, and aggressive behavior over finances. I sent a cease and desist letter through my attorney to Mary and any parties trying to relocate or devalue my parents' home. In emails, I affirmed I would not stand by while my parents were moved or their property reclassified. But I didn't withdraw. I didn't barricade. Instead, I visited. I sat in Dad's recliner, asked him whether the locks were switched, whether he'd seen any papers signed or houses listed. I held Mom's hand and asked her names she remembered for the treasurer and the bank contact. I made sure I was there in person, quiet, steady, observant. I saw Mary watching from the doorway, tension coiled behind her polite mask. I made no threats. I didn't promise retribution. What I silently signaled was this. I would stare at her moves until I forced her into daylight. Day by day, I showed up, meals, small talks, checking mail, making appointment reminders, just being present. Each time Mary attempted to insert herself, I offered only a patient smile and a note. I'm here. I let her fluster while I made a log. And then one afternoon, as I stepped off the porch, the realtor's sign went up in our parents' yard. The metal stand hammered into the ground. I felt the echo in my chest, cold as a steel blade. I made a note. If they move my parents tomorrow, it's over. I sat alone in my parents' study, the afternoon sun bleeding softly through faded curtains, casting a golden hue across the room. The quilt Mom had given me the night before was draped over my lap, like a memory, each patch whispering stories of Christmases past. I reached for the corner where the faded yellow star was stitched, the same star Mom had sewn onto every grandchild's stocking over the years, and slipped my fingers beneath it. There, barely perceptible to the touch, was the outline of a tiny key. She had sewn it in with care, the way only mothers do when their love turns into protection. It clicked cold against my palm, small but weighty with meaning. The safe deposit box was at First Midwestern, the same bank where I'd tracked the $10,000 transfer. I went early before the town stirred, before I could talk myself out of it. The manager, Mr. Alvarez, led me to a small back room with hushed reverence, like entering a chapel. When the box slid forward, my heart stuttered. This wasn't just metal and paper. This was her voice waiting for me. Inside was a slim manila folder, a fabric-wrapped USB stick, and a sealed envelope with "For Mary" written in my father's distinctive cursive. I stared at it, half expecting it to burn. My hands trembled as I opened the laptop I'd brought, inserted the USB, and double-clicked the first file. It took a moment for the video to load. Then there she was, my mother, at the dining room table. She was older than I remembered. Hair, softer eyes, tired, but knowing. The video was clearly self-recorded. She adjusted the camera with a shaky hand, then sat down and looked directly at the lens. "If you're watching this," she began, voice low and calm, "then something's gone off track. I made this video not to accuse, but to explain. Fairness matters. Honest math matters. But sometimes Even love gets noisy. She talked about the grandchildren clause, about her hopes that her legacy would uplift, not divide. She detailed how she had seen my sister Mary becoming more possessive over paperwork, how she had grown uneasy about Dad signing forms without fully understanding. Mom admitted she hadn't felt strong enough to confront Mary directly, but she had consulted an elder law attorney months before. That's when she created what she called a safety trust. This trust, she said, holding up a document for the camera, is for the grandchildren. All of them. It activates only if proven imbalance occurs. I hope it never does. But if you've reached this point, maybe it has. My throat tightened. She had seen it coming. All of it. Her voice wavered once when she said my name. "Mary," she whispered. "If this is in your hands, then know this. I believed you'd be the one to put things right." I paused the video and opened the manila folder. Inside were copies of handwritten care logs, prescriptions taken, appointments attended, shopping lists, home visits. Her penmanship was tidy and calm. Every entry was time-stamped, a quiet ledger of love and duty. Tucked in the back were notarized trust documents labeled Grandchildren Rebalancing Trust with a clause that explicitly stated its execution required documented court-noted inequity in financial gift allocation among minor descendants. My heart dropped. I turned next to Dad's envelope. I unfolded the letter inside carefully, its edges delicate from age or worry. His handwriting, large and round, trembled slightly across the page. "Mary, I'm not good with online accounts, and those forms confuse me. I asked your sister to use the money you gave us to open a college fund for Evan. I thought she did. If you're reading this, I'm sorry I didn't check. I never meant for him to be left out. Love, Dad." I sat there for a long while. The pieces snapped into place. Dad hadn't intended for the $10,000 to disappear into a split between Mary's child and her husband's LLC. He had hoped, like I had, that Evan would have a future cushion, a little seed of security planted in his name. But somewhere that intention had been quietly redirected. I looked again at the documents in the box. The trust was fully formed, legal, and held by the family's attorney. It only required the right evidence and a judge's confirmation. The care logs, the video, Dad's letter. This was a map. Mom hadn't just trusted me emotionally. She'd trusted me procedurally. She'd built a quiet fortress and left me the keys. I leaned back, the room spinning with realization. The woman who had raised me, who had stitched bedtime into quilts and patience into meals, had prepared a quiet revolution. All I had to do was step into it. And suddenly everything felt clearer. Mary thought she held the power because she held the paper. But Mom had known better. She trusted I'd let the records do the talking. I repacked everything carefully, rewrapped the USB, reread the last line of Dad's letter. When I closed the box and handed it back to Mr. Alvarez, I didn't feel grief. I felt momentum. Mom left me a map and a deadline. I arrived at Ms. Weiss's office just after 9. It was a Sunday, cold, and still the kind of morning that seemed designed for quiet reckoning. The quilt my mother had given me was folded neatly beside me, a talisman now, not just a keepsake. Inside my tote were folders of printed photos, a thumb drive of social media captures, and copies of care logs I'd requested under the pretense of family record keeping. I had enough coffee in me to vibrate, but my hands were steady. I wasn't here to hope, I was here to prove. Ms. Weiss greeted me in her usual composed tone. "Let's get to work." We started with the care logs. At a glance, they looked clean, too clean. Neat handwriting, consistent time entries, 9 a.m. to noon. Supervised meds and breakfast. 2 to 4 checked in on Dad, reviewed mail. Sunday brought groceries, stayed for cocoa. It was almost soothing, until it wasn't. I handed over a receipt from a boutique grocery store 20 miles away, time-stamped precisely during the med supervision slot. Then I pulled up Mary's Facebook post, a cheerful selfie at a friend's baby shower, captioned with "finally out of the house," taken during her reviewed mail with Dad window. A golf tee time email showed her husband and her on a 2 p.m. Sunday slot at Green Hollow Country Club, while she'd written, spent afternoon reading to Mom. Ms. Weiss shook her head, making notes. We laid the documents out side by side. Care log, receipt, screenshot, Facebook post, tea time. I watched the pages like puzzle pieces falling into place. This is textbook, Ms. Weiss murmured. Falsified logs, misrepresentation of care. If she billed this time or used it as justification for financial activity, we have grounds. We turned to the money. My $10,000 deposit had moved within 24 hours clear from my own statements. Half transferred to a 529 college account in my nephew's name. Not suspicious in itself if it had come from Mary's funds. But the transfer originated from my father's account where my deposit had landed, and the memo line read, Mary gift match. The other half had been marked roof repair, routed to Evergable LLC, her husband's company. I pulled out the city permit database printout. No building permit filed for the house in the last year. Then the state licensing search. Evergable LLC is registered landscaping only. No roofing license. Ms. Weiss's pen paused. No permit, no license, and she paid her own husband's company out of your father's account using your money. She tapped her notepad. That's self-dealing, likely POA abuse, combined with the falsified care documentation. She didn't finish the sentence. Instead, she turned to her computer and began drafting a petition. The filing would request a temporary suspension of Mary's power of attorney, a court-assigned conservator, and a full audit of the past 6 months of financial activity. I watched her work the tap of her keys steady and fast. It felt like finally breathing again. I spent the afternoon with my parents. Dad sat on the back porch bundled in his old cardigan. I brought a folder, just a few of the receipts and screenshots. I laid them out on the patio table and asked gently, "Do you remember Mary being with you that Saturday?" He blinked at the papers, leaned closer. "That's the day she said she brought groceries." He pointed to the timestamp. "But we ordered pizza that day. You brought it." I nodded. "She said she was here, logged the hours." His mouth pressed into a line. He didn't say anything for a long time. Then he looked at the photo of her at the golf course. "That's not right." Inside, Mom dozed in her chair. I laid the quilt over her knees. Her fingers brushed mine. "You're doing what's right," she murmured without opening her eyes. "Don't let it twist you bitter. Just stay straight." I sat in their kitchen that evening, sorting through every care log Mary had ever submitted. I used colored markers to cross-reference time entries with external proof. By the time I finished, entire weeks of care had been proven fraudulent. The longer I looked, the more obvious it became. Mary hadn't just bent the rules, she'd written her own. That night, I sent a report to the church board president. My parents had donated regularly for years, but the most recent donation, over $3,000, hadn't been recorded in the church ledger. The treasurer confirmed receipt came from Mary's email, not theirs. I emailed Ms. Weiss the compiled evidence. She replied within the hour. "All filed. The judge will review first thing Monday. Be ready." That evening, I tucked my son in. He asked if the bad Christmas was over yet. I told him not yet, but the truth was starting to show itself. He hugged me hard. I sat in my room, the quilt beside me, reading and rereading Mom's notes. Every line, every detail was a map. She'd known. Tomorrow, a judge decides who holds the pen. In the quiet minutes before court began, I sat alone in the hallway outside the judge's chambers, breathing steadily, fingers laced together to stop the shake. The folder in my lap held everything: care logs, bank statements, Facebook printouts, time-stamped golf tee times, an organized ledger of betrayal. The forensic accountant had gone through it all meticulously. His report, stacked neatly in a navy binder, used phrases like misappropriation, conflict of interest, and non-fiduciary behavior. He'd cross-referenced timestamps on the supposed care logs with my sister's own social media activity. On the days she claimed to be managing mom's meds or driving dad to appointments, she was photographed wine tasting, playing doubles, or celebrating spa Fridays at a resort. One post even showed her with a glass of Prosecco during an hour she claimed to be accompanying dad to physical therapy. Add to that the unexplained $5,000 marked as roof repairs, which we now knew had gone to her husband's LLC. The city confirmed there'd been no permits pulled, and the LLC, according to state records, had no license for contracting work. Not roofing, not anything. What's worse, APS had quietly started its own investigation after my anonymous report. The notes in their preliminary findings showed similar concerns: medication mismanagement, early signs of parental cognitive decline, and growing financial vulnerability. The investigator even flagged the emotional coercion my parents were under, subtle pressures guilting control over schedules, mail-even grocery trips. When my name was called, I stood and straightened my blazer. Calmly, I entered the room. My attorney nodded at me reassuringly, but I could see the tension on his face. This wasn't a small family squabble. This was court. Across the room, my sister sat stiffly, her expressions set somewhere between fear and fury. She wore her caregiver uniform, a soft beige cardigan, her hair pulled back in a loose bun, no makeup except a strategic touch of mascara. Her husband wasn't there. Maybe that was telling. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s, looked over her glasses as she flipped through the documents. "I've reviewed the forensic report and the APS preliminary findings," she said. "We will hear arguments briefly. Then I'll decide on the petition for temporary conservatorship." My attorney went first. He was calm, clear, deliberate. "Your Honor," he began, "this is not a case of theft in the traditional sense. It is the slow erosion of independence masked as caregiving. It's fiduciary erosion, using a position of trust to tilt fairness." He outlined the red flags, the pattern of self-dealing, the refusal to share financial statements, the inconsistencies in care logs, and the sudden opening of a 529 account for my sister's child days after a $10,000 transfer left my account money intended for my own son. Then he handed the judge a note from my mother's lawyer confirming the existence of the grandchildren trust, a safety mechanism she'd quietly established years ago in case of intergenerational imbalance. The trust was now eligible for activation. All it required was a judicial finding of mismanagement. It wasn't revenge. It was correction. I stood when it was my turn. My voice surprised even me, steady, even warm. "Your Honor, I'm not here to punish my sister. I'm not here to shame her. I believe she began with good intentions. But intentions can drift. And when money, stress, and control enter a room, it becomes easy to convince ourselves that we're owed something, that we're the only one who really understands." I glanced toward my sister, whose eyes finally met mine. "I don't want to fight," I continued. "I want fairness. For all the grandkids, hers included. I want my parents safe, not stripped of autonomy. I want their wishes honored, not edited. And I want us to get back to being a family that tells the truth, even when it's hard." There was a silence that hung in the room like a breath being held. The judge tapped her pen lightly on the desk. Then she nodded. Effective immediately, she said, "The current power of attorney is suspended pending a full audit. I hereby appoint the petitioner." She looked at me as temporary conservator. "All decisions of financial or medical weight shall route through her. The audit will determine final authority." My sister gasped softly. For the first time in months, I saw her mask crack. Not rage, not defiance, but fear. Real fear. I felt no triumph, only stillness. Outside the courthouse, I stood on the steps with the folder still clutched to my chest. My attorney was saying something about the next steps, the audit team, and formal letters to the banks. I nodded, but my mind had already wandered. Back to Christmas. Back to the $5 in my son's hand. back to his small, confused voice asking, "Did I do something wrong?" Today, I'd finally answered him. Peace is possible if truth is. And now the real repair could begin. The file was labeled December Contingency. I recognized my mother's handwriting immediately, neat, slanted, slightly right, always using a blue, fine-tip pen. The second video began with her seated in the same floral armchair, light filtering softly through the sheer curtains behind her. She wore her favorite ivory cardigan, the one with the embroidered cardinals, and her expression was tender, but unmistakably firm. "If you're watching this," she began, "it means there's been trouble. And I'm so sorry, sweetheart. I never wanted it to come to this, but I also knew I had to plan for it." She looked down, briefly inhaled, then met the camera again. "Your father and I always said we'd be fair to all our grandkids. Not just with gifts, but with chances. With the kind of start we wish we'd had. That's what the Fairness Fund is for." I froze. She explained how during a conversation with her attorney she had quietly requested the creation of a contingent trust, one that wouldn't interfere unless an imbalance was proven. She feared manipulation favoritism, especially if illness clouded their judgment. She wanted a backstop. "If the numbers ever start looking lopsided," she said, "this fund can correct course. Not punish, just realign." She paused, then added, "But only if the truth is spoken first." I listened as she outlined the terms. The fund held in escrow by her attorney could only be released under 3 conditions: a full admission from the party who skewed the contributions, full restitution to the underfunded grandchild's account, and this was the part that made my breath catch: community service from both children in equal measure. "The boys need to learn," she said, her voice gentler now. "That money is a tool, not a trophy. And giving back is a kind of justice." She ended with her signature line, "When love gets noisy, let the records do the talking." I sat back in my chair, the room silent except for the hum of the dishwasher in the kitchen. I felt something shift inside me, not just relief, not even triumph. Something deeper. A weight of validation that until now I didn't realize I was still carrying. We gathered that evening. The whole family, though the air was tight with tension. My sister sat rigid on the edge of the sofa, arms crossed, lips pressed in that tight line she used when she was trying not to explode. Dad was quieter than usual, fiddling with his wedding ring. My son sat beside me, his small hand in mine, unaware of the storm brewing just behind the polite silences. The attorney, Mr. Blake, played the video again in front of everyone. My sister's face changed by the second skepticism, then disbelief, then a flicker of fear. When it ended, no one spoke for a long moment. Mr. Blake cleared his throat. "Per Mrs. Nolan's request, this document outlines the escrowed trust and its conditional release." He placed it gently on the coffee table. "We need an official admission of misallocation of funds restitution to the equal value for both beneficiaries and a signed plan of community service to unlock it." "That's absurd," my sister hissed. She was sick. She didn't know what she was doing. Mr. Blake blinked slowly. "This was dated 7 months ago, countersigned by both witnesses and notarized," and he added, sliding a second envelope toward her. "Your name is nowhere on it." She lunged to her feet, voice rising. "So what now? I'm the villain. For trying to help my own child, for taking care of our parents when no one else did." "I never said you were a villain," I replied evenly. "I said the truth should be spoken. You're punishing me for being the responsible one. I did everything while you sat back and judged me. This whole setup, it's a setup." "No," I said quietly, meeting her eyes. "It's a mirror." Her mouth opened to retort, but her son... My nephew stood up slowly. "Mom?" he said, voice unsure but strong. "Did you really do that with the money?" Her head whipped toward him. "Sweetheart, you don't understand." He shook his head. "I just want it to be fair. I don't want something I wasn't supposed to have." My sister's face collapsed, not in defeat, but in exhaustion. Her arms dropped to her sides. The room held its breath. Mr. Blake waited. "Shall I file this with the court in the morning, or would you like to respond privately first?" I picked up the copy of the trust agreement and held it gently. "I can unlock the fund," I said, "if she unlocks the truth." I stood in the lawyer's conference room, quilt folded beside me on a side chair, watching Mary's face as Mr. Blake outlined terms. The air smelled of polished wood and quiet confrontation. Her defenses were tight, her posture rigid, yet I sensed a tremor in her pleading eyes. He cleared his throat and placed a folded document on the table in front of Mary. "Here is a settlement proposal, crafted not as punishment but as accountability and repair." He glanced at me, then back. "Your sister may respond today or by court deadline." I nodded, meeting Mary's eyes evenly. "I'll read it." The terms were clear. Repayment. Mary must repay $5,000, or if she cannot deposit the equivalent value into Evan's 529 account within 14 days. The fund must have the same growth potential the original match would have behaved under honest conditions. Public apology. Mary will offer a sincere apology at New Year's Sunday service during the pastoral announcements in front of the church community. She must speak the words, "I misused trust. I harmed family. I apologize to Mary and Evan." Record surrender. She must surrender all relevant records, bank statements, invoices, subcontractor agreements, contractor logs, care logs for independent review. In return, the grandchildren trust opens immediately. Both grandchildren receive equal benefits under the trust. No favored heir, no hidden advantage. It becomes a shared resource. To instill empathy and accountability, both children must commit to community service hours, e.g., 1 hour civil service per every $500 of misallocated funds before they can draw earnings. Mary's lips parted, but she stayed quiet, watching. Mr. Blake shifted to me. "Ms. Whitaker consents to these terms. She will comply with oversight even as temporary conservator." I swallowed. This wasn't revenge. It wasn't a demand. It was a dignified path forward. Mary's child. My nephew stood abruptly from behind Mary. She walked to me quietly and slipped me her phone. The screen showed a message. "Auntie, I just want fair." My heart squeezed. I looked at her. He had no obligation to watch the circus. All he asked was a level field. In that moment, I recognized the quiet truth driving this entire fight. Mary looked at her son with desperation. "Don't drag him into this," she whispered. He said, "You already did." Then Mr. Blake produced another document, a sworn affidavit signed by Mary's husband. His name was on the page that admitted the roof repair payment had been debt owed to his own business, not a service provided. His signature witness line corporate seal. He had turned man that night, owning up under legal pressure. Mary's face went pale. Her hand shook. Her mask cracked. I took a breath. "I will file this proposal with the court tomorrow. If you accept it, we avoid a full hearing. If you reject it, I'll ask the judge to enforce the trust clause as originally intended." My voice was steady. The room held its breath. Mary looked at her son. The weight of expectation community watching the trust document open on the table, all of it pressed down. She looked at me, then at counsel, then at her child. She swallowed hard. She did not speak yet. When I rose to leave, I took the quilt from beside me and gently placed it across her shoulders. "You were entrusted to help. Trust is not control." I turned to the lawyer and nodded. The room exhaled. Walking out of that room, I felt both quiet and charged. The pieces were there. The public eyes would be there. And the choice she would make, pride or repair, would echo long beyond a Sunday sermon. On New Year's Sunday, will she choose pride or her child's hand? Quite revenged, done I. I sat in the back pew of the church as the organist played softly, the morning sunlight filtering through stained glass and casting colors onto the wooden floor. In front of me, my sister stood at the lectern, her hands shaking ever so slightly, but her posture no longer defiant. This was New Year's Sunday. The service we had all known would come. The quiet in the sanctuary felt like a held breath, every eye turned toward one moment of reckoning. When she began to speak, her voice carried more humility than I had ever heard from her. "I want to offer my apology," she said, and paused, swallowing hard. "To my parents, to Mary, to Evan, and to everyone who believed in me. I allowed privilege and control to cloud what should have been love. I made choices in secret. I hurt family in silence. For that, I am sorry." Her words trembled but did not break. The treasurer then moved forward and held up 2 slips of paper. He nodded at the congregation, and in a clear voice he confirmed the net funds had been deposited equally into each child's account. Evidence of equal contribution. The grandchildren trust sealed in escrow had now been triggered. Both grandchildren, hers and mine, would enjoy equal benefit. No backroom favoritism, no hidden clauses. Just fairness. The room remained quiet, the kind of sacred silence you feel more in your bones than in your ears. After the service, as people filed past with tentative smiles and polite nods, I met my parents in the hallway. My father's eyes were misty. My mother hugged me tightly, her arms thin but full of a life's worth of hope. Outside, the snow lay in soft drifts, untouched, as if the world had decided to pause and witness our turn. Back at home, the change settled into daily life. My mother's medication chart was real consistent and reviewed by all of us each evening. Dad signed off on his budget spreadsheet. I kept read-only access for oversight, nothing more. The old power of attorney, the one Mary held, had been formally revoked. New documents were filed, recorded, stamped. Mary no longer had sole control over anything. She could visit, speak, help, but nothing financial, nothing secret. I watched from the kitchen window as she backed out of the driveway after dinner, her car lights dim in the dusk. She had come willingly to the settlement, to the public apology, to accountability. She showed up in the finance class at the community center. She joined mine in volunteer shifts at the homeless shelter, sorting cans, stacking coats, doing the jobs none of us brag about. I saw her there one Saturday, sleeves rolled, hair pulled back, working beside my son. No pretense, no grandstanding. Just effort. On Christmas Eve, we gathered in the living room again. The tree was trimmed simply. Beneath it, the gifts were modest books, gloves, small luxuries. I paused at one branch near the top where a single plain envelope hung from the silver tinsel. It was craft paper folded over a $5 bill pinned gently in place. My mother's handwriting scrawled across the front. Small, honest hours. I slid it free and opened it carefully. The bill inside was crisp. The message was soft, but clear. Truth doesn't need volume. No one else peered until I let it fall into my palm. I looked around the room, my parents smiling with relief, Mary sitting quietly beside her son. My son looking at me with wide eyes. In that moment, the quiet felt like justice. No vindictiveness, just resolution. They called it revenge. I remembered the headlines I had feared, but tonight, under candlelight and evergreen scent, I understood it was not revenge. It was recalibration. It was a restoration of balance. It was Christmas. I didn't take a cent for myself. I didn't pocket a gift or boast of victory. The best gift I could take was peace for my parents, for my son, and for myself. I placed the $5 envelope gently into my pocket so I could hold it all night, and then next morning pin it to the tree myself. Small, honest hours. That would be the final marker, the quiet victory. They labeled it revenge in whispers and sidelines, but in my heart, I had already named it Christmas small, and finally fair. If this story moved you, if you felt the sting of that $5 envelope, the tension of a Sunday dinner where truths trembled on silverware, or the quiet power of a mother's final gift, then you're exactly where you need to be. This channel exists for people who believe family isn't just about blood, but about boundaries, fairness, and standing firm when others expect you to shrink. Every week we bring you real stories like this, emotional, raw, and sometimes painfully close to home. Stories where the most powerful character isn't the loudest voice, but the one who chooses truth over noise. If you haven't subscribed yet, now is the time. You won't want to miss what's coming next. But we don't just want you to watch, we want to hear from you. Was the narrator right to let consequences speak instead of exploding in anger? Did the sister deserve a second chance? Or was her apology too little too late? What did you think of the honest math principle the mother left behind? And most importantly, what would you have done? Leave a comment. Share your story. Because in our community, every voice counts and you never know who needs to hear yours. Whether you're a mother, a daughter, or someone who's ever felt overlooked at the family table, your insight matters. Subscribe now, like the video, and let's keep telling the stories that others are afraid to say out loud. Because around here, we don't just tell the truth, we honor it.